You see, Roly needs no introduction. I doubt that there would be more than a handful of people in the room who have never heard of him, or seen him. He is a famous media star. Even at this tender age, famous media star. And just so you don't get things wrong, he's not like that former male premier who had a very large reputation as well as a media tart. So you've got the difference. Roly is fluent in more foreign languages than the automatic interpretation service at the United Nations. And he reached that level of expertise when he was in his teens. He has more degrees than the thermometer. And notwithstanding all of that, he really is a great guy, whom I am honoured to call a friend. And as if that is not enough, he was even awarded an Aussie Gong a few years ago. So, Rotarians and guests, I give you Roly Sussex.
I'm conscious of your hip. He doesn't half tell some porkies, you know, this is terrible. But you should see me pushing barrows of wood around Bill's place when he's momentarily indisposed. He owes me one. Okay, I'm going to talk to you tonight about gender and English. And it's an interesting story because you might have read recently that in England, this is actually a top-level government thing. They've decided that E, G, and IE are too hard for people to understand. So they're going to take them out of any government document. Oh. You know, it's almost as clever as the Preston, Lancashire Council a couple of years ago decided they would ban swearing on the streets of Preston and would fine people £60. I wish I'd been at the council meeting when they decided what words were on the list. But we've become very sensitive about lots of acts of language, and that's what I want to talk to you today because it's very important and interesting. The story begins in America in the 70s when there was a much delayed reaction about using denigrating language to people on account of race. Now this was long overdue. You might remember Bert Newton interviewing Muhammad Ali, and he said, "I like the boy," and he nearly ended up in the next studio on the end of an uppercut. A very denigrating way of referring to black people by white people in America. Bert didn't know it. Someone should have briefed him beforehand. But that was the sort of story that began in the 70s. And it's resulted in the fact that the word nigger is now called the N word in America, and you can't use it unless you are black, talking to black people. Between peers, it's okay. Does anyone know Kinky Friedman and the Texas Jew Boys? Yes. A very disreputable band who turned bad taste into an art form. And they have a song which is called "They Don't Make Jews Like Jesus Anymore," which will give you an idea of the sort of thing that they do. And one of their lines is, "I had you down for a slightly anemic, well-dressed country nigger." You don't get away with things like that in America nowadays, and I think it's very good that we don't. Words like boom have gone from Australian English, and high time as well. We have grown up a lot in my lifetime, and we're much more considerate about the sorts of insults and hurt that we might give to other people by the way we talk. And I can remember my uncle, who was from La Spezia in Italy, and he arrived in Australia 3 days before the war was declared. And so they locked him up for 6 years. And I heard him being abused as a refo. No, he wasn't a refo. The word refo was definitely denigrating in those days. And they called people bots, even though they didn't come from the Baltic states. We've grown out of that as well. So, the big story here is about gender. And before we do gender, I want to talk a little bit about gender in language and gender in the real world. Gender in language is whether the nouns are masculine, feminine, neuter, or whatever. You might have done this at school. And they are sometimes predictable. If you have a male person, male is in the real world and someone who has male bits, all right? And a male person is often represented by a masculine noun, and a feminine person by a female noun. But the genders in language aren't predictable. For example, the word for moon in Latin is luna, which is feminine, right? And in Russian it's luna, and in Polish it is luna, they're all feminine, and in German it is der Mond, and that's masculine. Why should the moon suddenly change gender? Well, that's the way the language grew up. Right? And often these things are unpredictable. That's inside the language. Outside the language is sex, and this is male and female as opposed to masculine and feminine. This has actually caused quite a lot of trouble over the years recently, as people have become aware that people of different genders in the real world need to find a word to describe them. In Spanish, the word for a prime minister is el primer ministro, and it is masculine. Okay? And then Maggie Thatcher came along. And they used to call her Attila the Hen, by the way. And the Spanish press had a little hernia for a bit. They couldn't work out what to do about this. Eventually they changed the language and they called it la primera ministra. In other words, they created a new rule of grammar which said this word can be feminine if we've got a female lady we want to refer to. And in French the word for a judge is le juge, and of course for centuries the only judges were male. But when they started getting ladies doing the job, they've changed the gender, and you can now be either le juge or la juge, depending. So you see that language can change in response to genders. Now, the bits which have got to do with English language are really quite important. First of all, when I was at school, there was a rule which says he includes she. Okay, so if a student hands in his essay late, he will have a penalty. And he was taken to include she, which was very imbalanced and unfair. How are we going to solve that one? Well, if a student hands in his or her essay late, he or she would have a penalty on his or her essay. No, it's terrible. Right. So we've actually decided to break a rule of grammar. And we say, if a student hands in their essay late, right? And the purists get up and say, look, terrible, terrible, you can't make a plural there refer to a singular noun. Well, Shakespeare did it. And if Willie the Shake did it, we can as well. And it's the easiest way out of the trouble. Okay, in other words, yeah?
Wouldn't it be better to say if students hand in there?
Ah, yes. But occasionally you do want to refer to a singular. If you've got a singular, you're stuck. All right.